Hello, mate to Thrive Nation. I've got a very unique special doctor, and I've been following her for a while. I will say this, her Instagram account is incredible. She's got the most amazing energy. She's a beautiful soul. I listen to her and I learn. And I learn because it's repetitive memory in terms of what's really important with regards to our health and our wellness. So welcome to the show, Dr. Kara Fitzgerald.
It is so great to be with you. I am just thrilled to be connected with South Africa again, even if it's through Zoom.
Yeah, and you've done a lot of lecturing here, so I'm sure a lot of the
Love it.
doctors that listen to the show have heard you. And so we've been involved with Metametrix and AmiPro for a long time. So yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself with regards to this year, because you've got a new book called Younger You, incredible book that I got on
Yes.
PDF, and
Oh, cool.
incredible study where you reverse aging. So the people listening now, let's just hook them with some incredible insights in terms of Kara Fitzgerald, what she's doing, and how many people's lives she's changed globally, because I know that you become an international phenomenon.
I have to say that this study riveted the world. I mean, it's extraordinary. I mean, I think about our little space where I am in Connecticut and kind of a small provincial town, and we just have, yeah, we're starting to get this information out to the world. And just like yourself, prevention is where it's at. So, I'm in clinical practice. I teach at the Institute for Functional Medicine. And as you pointed out, I've lectured on functional medicine really around the world and love going to South Africa. Actually, we all do in functional medicine when we have an opportunity, and speaking to the amazing people there who are so gracious and interested in this medicine. So that's what I've been doing. I have a clinic, wear my professional hat. I have a podcast, and as you mentioned, a social platform where we're always putting this information out. We created the methylation diet and lifestyle, and I did a training on that, I want to say back in 2016 in South Africa. And it was a program we were using in practice. The whole program was based on my read on the epigenetic literature. At that time, there was a lot of literature coming out looking at cancer. There still is. The tumor microenvironment very efficiently takes over epigenetic expression, takes over gene expression from the individual. So the tumor microenvironment turns genes on to aid its survival, turns off genes that are protective against cancer. And so that stopped me in my tracks. And ultimately, I decided that we needed a very upstream diet and lifestyle approach to this. So along with my nutrition director here in our clinic, Romilly Hodges, we created a diet and lifestyle program specifically designed towards influencing the epigenetic mark sort of most dominant, and that is DNA methylation. So the whole program is built around how do we optimize DNA methylation.
Okay,
It's not
brilliant.
just turning it way up, it's like it's balancing it.
Beautiful. And I know there's a lot of technical terms that I want to sort of just distill and deconstruct for people, but people are listening
Yes.
now. We got to really get them and hook them. What are things that they can change in terms of nutrition or sleep or lifestyle right now that they may never have heard of? I know one thing in terms of rosemary. Maybe you can just give us other tips and
Awesome.
hacks in
Yes.
terms of what people can do to reverse their age and stay younger.
Awesome. Oh, that's fabulous. All right. Well, let me just say, with that background that I just gave you in mind, we ended up getting to study it. And what we showed was that we changed gene expression and we actually made people biologically younger. So that's sort of the big news is that it was the first study of its kind. And that's why it got so much recognition, and it's still getting a lot of recognition. So how do we actually do it? Now you're asking me, how do we actually reverse our bioage? Well, you're right. Yeah, there's some very incredibly smart nutrients out there that seem to have kind of a wisdom around how they influence gene expression. They want the right genes on, and they support us in that. And a lot of these nutrients we know. So for instance, turmeric. I mean, if you like to tuck into a really good curry, you're eating a really smart, what we call epinutrient, or nutrient influences gene expression. As you said, rosemary, one of my favorites. I've always got rosemary kicking around in my office. I add it to everything. Rosemary has something called rosmarinic acid in it.
I want to
Green
stop you there because
tea.
I know that you're very sort of flexible with people, asking questions. I've listened to your
Yeah,
podcast.
yeah,
You've
yeah.
given many interviews.
Go.
But what about rosemary essential oil? Because it just seems practical. Or do people have to chew on actual rosemary, smell it, or can they have it like diffused in their, bedrooms while they sleep? Is that going to be beneficial, or don't we really know the ins and outs of the science?
That's such a smart question. We don't have the kinds of studies on rosemary essential oil that we do on rosemary itself. It would be easy though. We would just need to look at what the active ingredients are in, what the compounds are in rosemary oil. If we find that there's rosmarinic acid, then that's going to be a bioactive form of rosemary. I generally just grind rosemary onto my salads and so forth, or whatever savory dish I've got. Actually, we have a lemon tart recipe that has rosemary on top, and it really works.
But because the reason I'm asking is
smart.
we got to make it simple for people. These got to be actionable steps, so carrying rosemary around is simple enough, but if you just add that to someone's lifestyle in their day, it's just too much. So carrying a little bit of rosemary sort of essential oil.
So listen, probably it will favorably influence gene expression, but I can't be as clear on it. But I want to say, if folks are open to getting the book at all, we've got a 30-page appendix packed with the nutrients. So you can look, what spices are you using every day? Do you cook with thyme? Do you use dill? Are you using garlic? Are you using ginger? I mean, really, a lot of those spices in our cabinet, a lot of those colorful fruits and veg are epigenetic. They're active. They're doing good things for us. So just really more broadly, much of what a healthy lifestyle is about is going to be smart as far as epigenetics.
So let's take, all the spices, because I think they're important. I think people don't have enough spices, and I don't think they use things like the rosemary. I don't think they use other things like sort of, what do we got? Oregano, which is very, powerful in sort of Greek islands. They've used that. We use a lot of oregano. I think that's really, really important. But what, in terms of functional medicine, if we try and correlate that to a lab, if we look at like the studies on rosemary, maybe from an HSCRP, or how do we measure that it's changing that epigenetics or that gene expression to ensure that actually it's having an anti-aging longevity benefit?
So you would have to do, basically what we did, and these labs are not widely available. When we conducted our study, you couldn't get it in the clinical setting in the United States. You could only get it in the research setting. So you can look at DNA methylation patterns now. In the States, there are more of these tests becoming available. I don't know how it is in South Africa, whether or not you've got those tests available. You do have some genetic testing companies there. My guess is that they are thinking about measuring epigenetics, and it would be worth it to ask them, when they're launching them. Epigenetics is becoming, really big business in the traditional setting. We can use epigenetics to diagnose cancer, and we can use it for other reasons. And in our place in the functional medicine world, we can use it to look at biological aging, how fast the body is aging, and we can look at it to see what we call nutrient responsive genes. Is what we're eating and how we're living actually influencing some of the favorable genes?
So you're not looking,
so I think that
like at the SNPs.
You guys will be there.
Okay, so we're still going to get, so we're not looking at the SNPs specifically saying, oh, okay, now we got a DNA sort of methylation SNP, then we correlate that to like sort of a broad, homocysteine. You're actually looking at sort of almost like a kinetic sort of alive sort of expression of that sort of SNP.
So just get a visual of the double-stranded double heel. Get a DNA picture in your mind, and if you zero in on that, on a particular gene, you will see methyl groups, actually specifically on the cytosine base in the gene. And a methyl group is a carbon and 3 hydrogen. So if you can kind of visualize, they actually illustrate these in the scientific literature as a red lollipop. So just see that DNA and just see those little red lollipops dotting above it. And that's what's measured. So that's what we looked at in our study. The genome has about 20 million of them. I mean, there's a lot of them. And so we looked at about 1 million. I know, it's incredible. And then if you drill down further, the clock that we used in our study had 353 of those red lollipops that it was looking at.
Sure.
And other clocks have different lengths. But yeah, so we're looking at just those red lollipops. We're not looking at the single nucleotide polymorphisms.
Okay,
But
brilliant.
I will say there is a little bit of science coming out suggesting that some of those SNPs, like MTHFR, may influence those red lollipops. So,
Okay. And
stay
then what
tuned.
about sort of that broad stroke of looking at homocysteine, how important that is, and a high homocysteine? Would that then have less red lollipops on there, or what's going to sort of look at it in terms of that? Yeah, we give folate, we give choline, we give these, these methyl donor SAMe, and then patients really respond. Homocysteine comes down, so then you're affecting the epigenetic of those lollipops on that DNA strand.
Yes, you're totally affecting the epigenetics. Yes. So if you have an elevated homocysteine for whatever reason, I mean, as we age, homocysteine tends to rise, whether you have SNPs or not. Dropping that homocysteine will influence those red lollipops 100%. However, and this is the caution, this is the big caveat. It'd be easy for us to live forever if all we needed to do was push methylation forward, right? And to just ingest a bunch of folate and a bunch of B12, et cetera. But what we know from looking at these millions of red lollipops is that as we age, they become disordered. They become imbalanced. There's too many on certain genes, and that inhibits the gene from being turned on. Classically, pro-inflammatory genes as we age have few lollipops, so they're turned on. Inflammation is turned on as we age, just like we see it in the disease process. Genes that promote cancer are turned on. They're called oncogenes. And then genes that protect us from cancer and genes that quench inflammation are actually turned off as we age. So you want to be mindful. If you just dump a bunch of choline and betaine and folate and B12 into an individual, then you may turn off genes that you actually want on. You may have too many lollipops in the wrong spot. So how do you actually control where these lollipops are going? And that is thinking about those nutrients we started our conversation in about rosemary. You talked about oregano. We talked about turmeric or curcumin, green tea, et cetera. These are not methyl donors. They're not folate, B12, et cetera, but they seem to direct where these red lollipops are going, so they go where they need to go. So if I prescribe B12 or folate or betaine or choline to a patient in my practice, 100%, I am giving them all of these nutrients as well. And if I can do the methyl donor heavy lifting through diet, i.e. giving folks, mushrooms, greens, if they're willing to eat liver, give them eggs, et cetera. If I can get the folate, the choline, the B12 in them through food, I'm going to do that first and then layer on B12 and supplemental folate, et cetera, later on.
Brilliant.
Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. And I think you've obviously got the measuring tools to have a look at these sort of DNA strands in terms of these lollipops. It's a lovely analogy, isn't it? But
it's easy to talk about. I'm glad that you kind of grabbed it and used it, because it does make the conversation easier.
Yeah, look, obviously a backstory really helps, a little bit of history in functional medicine and experience, but I think what's important, if we look at herbs and spices, we've covered that now. Maybe someone hasn't heard of something specifically that they should definitely be doing that was maybe part of the study. I do want to unpack the study later, but let's just grab them. So rosemary is your top one, maybe oregano, turmeric, you said. What else from a dietary perspective would you want them to do? Mushrooms
are fabulous. Yeah, so if you can get your hands on some good mushrooms, really any of them. We sort of highlight shiitake, but maitake, enoki, even button mushrooms, those basic mushrooms that are used commonly. Salmon, fatty fish of any kind, seeds. So chia seeds, sunflower seeds, etc. Nuts, good fatty nuts, walnuts, and so forth. The berries of all form are fabulous berries. We highlight blueberries, but there's, so many others.
Yeah.
What else? Peppers, just again, broadly colorful fruits and veg. We want you to be hydrated sufficiently. You need to be moving your body. We can talk about some of the lifestyle things we looked at in our study, but those nutrients are some of the big ones.
Okay, good. Now, the Metametrix sort of nation would know quite a lot about the top 10 blood tests. I always try and simplify things because at the end of the day, patients are not doctors, but if we can empower them to know the right labs, and I'm talking basics, ferritin, your homocysteines, your HSCRPs, what would be your top 10 that they could say, okay, I really want to know this now. Obviously, the Apple Watch can give us a live glucose reading very soon. We do a lot of CGM here with the Metametrix clients. But what would be your top 10 blood tests that people would say, I want to get educated and I want to make sure that my doctor that I go to sends me for these labs?
Well, I can actually give you a spreadsheet. You can calculate a biological age using standard blood chemistries, and I'm going to give you those. In fact, it might be, there are 10 of them. So albumin. So think about, so again, we're talking about a standard blood chemistry that you've ordered 1,000,000 times on your patients. Albumin, glucose, creatinine, alkaline phosphatase, and then a standard complete blood cell count, which would include lymphocytes, mean cell volume, RCDW, a red blood cell width, as well as white blood cell count, and then a C-reactive protein. If you get those 10 labs, you can plug them in to a spreadsheet that will spit out your bioage.
What?
Yeah.
That is incredible. Is that your formula? Is that your equation?
No, it's actually, so one of the biological age, a really highly respected biological age clock that is looking at DNA methylation, looking at those red lollipop patterns, is based on these 10 simple blood tests. So this is something that you can actually use, that we're using in clinical practice, and it's available.
But what's your comment on like ferritin and then IGF-1 and vitamin 100%. D and rich? But how does that fit into the equation then? Is there not a missing piece of the pie there?
No. So they designed this clock using thousands and thousands of human specimen, and they found, they started actually with 43. So I'm sure that they included ferritin in some of their earlier investigations, but they just found that these 10 were reliable predictors of morbidity and mortality, actually more so than chronological age. So as you know, chronological age itself is age itself, not chronological age, but just aging is the biggest risk factor for all of the chronic diseases. Aging is the biggest risk factor. And this easy blood calculation is a better predictor of morbidity and mortality than the chronological age itself.
I have to get that. That is incredible.
I'll send it over to you. Yeah, you can use this with all your patients. It's really fabulous. It's easy and it's fun. Yeah. Cool. Now I will say that technology is evolving, and we're getting more investigations that we can use. So stay tuned. But this is absolutely an awesome, easy, affordable starting point. But 100%, I agree with you that, ferritin, other inflammatory markers, what your lipids are, if you can get an advanced lipid panel, all of those, insulin, A1C, et cetera, hormones, DHEA, all of those are useful and have their place in longevity medicine.
Okay, good. Let me get your quick, before we get into the study, because I think it's important, at Made to Thrive and at the practice, we use health coaches, your nutritionists who are weekly connecting with those people in the state, I think was fundamentally important. I don't think enough is said about it, but I want to get your quick sort of view on the microbiome. If you think that is going to be the way that we're going to predict sort of, anti-aging, longevity, health span in the future, because it seems that this sort of circle of the microbiome has been going on for a long time, and there's not sort of definitive sort of outcomes with regards to microbiome and its impact on longevity and health span.
Yeah, you know what? It's complicated. There's a lot going on in the microbiome, right? And everybody's microbiome is different. I think really nailing down conclusive, information on how we would regulate the microbiome and longevity is sticky. It's challenging. I know there's a lab here in the States that's claiming they can predict bioage with your microbiome, and I have, I raise a pretty big eyebrow to that. That's not a tool that I would be using yet. And 100% your microbiome is playing a role in how well you're living and how long you're living. So does the microbiome influence health span and lifespan? Unequivocally, 100% it does. Does it influence the red lollipops? Totally, absolutely it does. But do we know how to look at the
Exactly.
microbiome and say you're going to live X, number
Yeah.
of years or not, or you're this? We're only just putting our toe in that pot. We're only just starting to learn. Um, we need to take care of our microbiome. And when we go very upstream and we use a whole foods diet, et cetera, and we really nourish it, if we're careful about not staying long term on, say, a very low carb diet, which basically fasts the microbiome. I think that there's a place for the low carb diet. I'm a fan of it, but we also have to be nourishing our microbiome too, with plant foods and so on and so forth. So I think as long as if we tend to our microbiome, it will take care of us. But be careful of the conclusions. I am a big fan of Akkermansia, some of the keystone probiotics in our gut, and keeping robust amounts of them. So they have studied centenarians' microbiome, and you
Oh,
do
wow.
see that diversity is present. You do see that they've got a decent amount of Akkermansia, one of the, a keystone player in our gut. However, again, we just need to be mindful. So we could conclude that a healthy microbiome is essential, that it's a player in gene expression and DNA methylation. It's going to influence the red lollipops. We absolutely have to be thinking about it and taking care of it. We know that people who are living long, who are healthy, that's key, have robust, diverse microbiomes. They tend to have a lot of Akkermansia. So we've got this information that, is truly, I'm sure it's guiding your practice and what you're doing with your patients. And it certainly is ours here. But for me to actually have my microbiome tell my bio age, we're not there yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've summarized it correctly. It's a huge part of the practice and made to thrive. But in terms of determining whether you live long and longevity and health span, I don't think it's there yet. And I think you've summarized it really well. Important, but we don't have the specific details on it. So that's good about microbiome. One or two questions I got before we get into the study, because I've interviewed, and we'll put some links to the Dr. Gundry podcast, the Dr. Wall's podcast, is that there seems to be a little bit of sort of debate about IGF-1, mTOR, CAMPK in terms of what levels they should be. A lot of people saying it should be low in terms of longevity. You're the longevity expert. Others saying that it should be on the higher side to, in terms of wellness and how you're feeling, maintaining muscle mass. And Gabriel Lance's work on, the longevity organ being muscle. So it seems it's difficult to ascertain whether we should cycle with regards to IGF-1 and GH and a lot of these. Where does your take on a lot of these? Because
so interesting.
It's just so confusing for so many people. You're unlocking the keto code with low IGF-1, but you want to maintain muscle mass and GH. And, just tell us what you think, because I think it's a very slippery place.
I love hearing that you are just sitting in the middle of that quagmire just as much as we are. That's awesome. So it's happening everywhere. Yeah, we're about to release a blog on the topic.
Okay.
So I podcasted with Walter Longo.
Okay.
You know who he's at, the
absolutely.
University of Southern, you know who he is.
Yeah.
And of course he's advocating for low protein, low IGF-1.
Yeah.
And he cited a paper in my podcast that just got a ton of attention on social media where, high protein intake was associated with massive mortality in their population. And this was his research that prompted him to lower one of the studies that prompted him to keep protein recommendations. Also, when you look at centenarians, again, when you look at people who are living now and living very well, really for the most part, they are not eating, 2 grams of protein per kilogram body weight. Believe me. I mean, at all. I mean, the Okinawans are on a really low protein diet. The Sardinians, there was an interesting study in looking at the oldest of the old in Sardinia, and they naturally increased their protein the older they got, but it's still not 2 or 2.2 grams per kilogram, like people are recommending in the States, or like the scientists who are also muscle builders are recommending a ton. And so how do we think about it? This is what I say. I think that we've got to keep, so those of us who are into resistance training and building muscle, and I'm in that camp, we cannot dismiss what is happening with these long-lived healthy centenarians, and that they're ingesting less protein and they're living well. So we can't dismiss all of that. we can look at the Seventh-day Adventists who are actually vegetarian or vegan in some cases. Same thing. They're not ingesting a ton of protein. So we would be remiss. We would not be scientific if we just said those guys are wrong. All of those studies are wrong. There's too many of those studies for us to dismiss them. But we also look at muscle mass and how essential that is to health span. And we can see that there are many deaths associated with poor muscle mass as we age, from falls and so forth, and compromised, bone density. Sarcopenia, low muscle mass is a huge problem. So there's these two pieces. And how do we manage that? I think likely eating a higher protein diet in the context of eating an impeccable diet. So you're not eating junk food and processed food and fast food, but you're eating a good, clean, whole food diet. A higher protein intake probably doesn't have the negative outcome, that Longo and Levine talked about in their 2014 paper, where they saw massive, mortality and morbidity and mortality with high protein. So in the context of a good quality whole food diet, glucose is controlled, insulin is controlled, we're probably doing okay. And there's some suggestion that when I haven't been able to put my hands on the reference, but Rhonda Patrick, a famous scientist in the States, she's a podcaster here in the States who's been tussling with this topic, talked about that being the case. So a good whole foods, high protein diet was actually fine. But I need to put my hands on that reference. So my conclusion is perhaps we consider increasing protein during our resistance training. We might consider, I'm really thinking about this and tussling with it now. Do we do, a week on high protein and then a week slightly lower, or do we do a handful of weeks of higher protein while we're really getting into resistance training and then maybe pulse it? I'm not sure of the answer, but because we are starting to have some tools to measure biological age, and because we have the labs that you measured earlier, we can see how somebody responds. We can, look at their BIA, we can look at their muscle mass, et cetera. We can look and see how people respond through the lens of functional medicine, systems medicine. And I think we can make a good decision. But do all of us need to be eating a ton of protein? I'm not convinced. And I think if we shut our eyes to the people who are living well for a very long time, not eating a ton of protein, that we're foolish.
But then do we have a mark on IGF-1 that would be important that we could sort of use as a guideline? At the end of the day, how I process those proteins is different to you. I'm using grass-fed, grass-finished. What does that do to IGF? Is it the toxicity of the protein in that study that caused more problems from an industrialization point of view? Or is it the high omega-6s in that, protein that caused issues? So where do we sit with IGF-1 and where do we sit with mTOR and CMPK?
I don't know that a high IGF-1 would be associated with unclean meat. I wouldn't extrapolate that. But would that inflammation in the poor quality meat, drive another process that might influence metabolism? That might influence, blood sugar regulation, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know that a robust IGF-1 is necessarily a problem if other markers are dialed in. I don't know. I mean, I know there's some suggestion that a lower IGF-1 is associated with longevity and, reduced incidence of cancer, et cetera, et cetera. I know that's certainly been looked at again by
Longo. Is a lower
Longo.
IGF-1 related to a loss of muscle mass sarcopenia, so that if you've got a lower IGF-1, then you're going to lose muscle mass? Because I'm just thinking, I just went to Cyprus now.
Yeah, but not pathologically, though. It doesn't have to be. So it certainly could be, but it doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't necessarily have to be sarcopenic. You may have, but you'll probably have a lower body weight, and you'll have less muscle than, say, I don't know, whatever superhero is in your mind, so yeah, a lower IGF-1 is associated with lower growth hormone, and probably that's associated with a lower muscle mass. but it doesn't mean you're going to be sarcopenic and you're therefore going to suffer the outcome of sarcopenia, the negative
Okay.
outcome.
Okay.
I mean, again, long-lived people, I don't think have, all the longer lived, lower protein consuming folks probably don't have cranked up
Mm.
IGF-1. In fact, there is that blue zone that Longo references in Ecuador that have a genetically low IGF-1 deficiency, and they have lower rates of cancer, et cetera. It has been argued that they are also highly insulin sensitive. They're very carb tolerant. They're
Wow.
so that may be the driver
Sure.
of why
Fascinating.
they're doing so well.
Yeah, and
I guess, I think that's reasonable.
I've just come from Cyprus. All my ancestry is from Cyprus, and I look at
Oh,
them
cool.
in the village, and very similar to a career.
Yeah.
And there wasn't a lot of meat, but there wasn't a lot of complications in terms of just how they live socially. So a lot of these chronic diseases, I think, are based within cities, and so we look at their environment and how many of the environmental factors play a huge role in terms of how they process their nutrients, how much nutrients they get from the food that they take. So it's quite difficult, is it not, to extrapolate from these blue zones and then place those same factors within a city?
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. Yeah. Right. You went to Cyprus, and if your family is there, they're probably really pretty well connected. There's a lot of community. There's probably a lot of love, and there's probably a lot of hugs and just celebration and whole foods, eating together, etc. Yeah, cleaner air, perhaps cleaner water. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, there's a different dynamic. Yes, I will say though, interestingly, is that Seventh-day Adventists are in California. They're in Loma Linda, California, and they are a blue zone. I don't think that they're quite as robust as some of the ones that are outside of the U.S., but there are people living well elsewhere. So, but I do agree. I absolutely agree with you. Like we have to think about how we can adopt some of those principles. And I think to your point, what do we have to do differently if we're not living in a full blue zone environment? What do we have to do differently? Certainly we need to put, and I think that's fair. I think that's absolutely worthy. Like we need to pay attention to detox. We need to pay attention to, living as cleanly as possible and intentionally. I mean, I'm in a suburb of New York. You can sort of feel the cars are faster here. There's more stress, and some people are taking very long train commutes to get into New York City, and we have to counteract that.
Yeah. Sure. Let's go into the study now, and let's talk about younger you in terms of how you reverse 3 years of, in terms of this biological age. I mean, I just salute you. Well done. You're
Thank
like
you.
One of these absolute health heroes. The fact that I could just have you on the show is incredible. But tell us about this study, and start with these nutritionists that were almost like health coaches, because I think a big chasm, and we don't, the integrative medical practitioners don't use a lot of health coaches here in South Africa. And I know Dr. Mark Hyman's work with having health coaches and one physician seeing 8 people at the same time. It hasn't really translated here into South Africa and Africa. But give us sort of your view on the importance of an accountability partner, someone who's coaching you along the journey.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question. It's incredibly important. I don't even think I wrote it in the paper. 100%. I think the success of what we studied is because our nutritionists were in contact with our study participants at least weekly for the first month. So that was the requirement in the study. You had to be in contact with your nutritionist once a week for the first month, and then you could just do it as needed after. Most of them decided to stay in contact for the duration of the study. And the nutritionists had to follow a study protocol, which was very dry. They were only allowed to ask certain questions. They weren't doing the motivational coaching that we do in practice. They weren't doing that. They were just asking them if they had questions about nutrients. So in this dry, research setting, we still got really a high adherence. So just that touch point made a huge difference. And so if you layer in the motivational tools that we use in practice, you can see how essential coaching is and how essential, nutrition support is. It's essential. We need to publish, and at some point we will, on our adherence data, because it's really impeccable. And I think one of the criticisms of nutritional interventions are that there's the adherence is really poor, or people, report what they ingested. They do a food frequency questionnaire and they don't remember, so they just sort of make it up. And, over and over again, studies are debunked because they used a food frequency questionnaire and it just wasn't accurate or useful. So for us to have our participants stay in contact with our nutrition team was the difference between a successful intervention and a failure. And I wanted it's not often that you're given a grant. Metametrix gave us an unrestricted grant. Brent Eck, the CEO of Metametrix, is a dear friend of mine and has been interested in this DNA methylation research that I've been doing from the get-go since, I don't know, 2013 or 14, whenever he sort of stepped into Metametrix. He and I have been talking about this and he's been fascinated with it. And so he supported us financially to hire a clinical research center to run this, randomized control trial. And believe me, I just wanted every support in there. It's not just because I don't think that anybody will be giving me a six-figure, US dollar grant anytime soon. So yeah, having the nutritionists, having these nutrition coaches was 100% huge, 100% huge. So really good question.
Brilliant. Talk about the other lifestyle factors, maybe, stress reduction or sleep or exercise. What did you get the sample group to do?
Yeah. So we, and by the way, our population was healthy, and we can talk about why that's important later. But so a lot of them came to us exercising. That's what I was thinking about. But so lifestyle influences where those red lollipops as much as folate, as much as B12. Like, I want to underline what a big deal lifestyle is in influencing these things. Exercise acts like green vegetables. Exercise acts like folate in some ways, and it's extraordinary to me, and turmeric and so forth. So it's been shown in the research that exercise will turn on genes as we age. So remember, bad genes get turned on as we age, good genes get turned off. Exercise will turn back on those good genes. And what's super cool about it is that the older we are, the more impactful this phenomena is. It's like you get more bang for your exercise buck the older you are. It's just so cool to me. And I'll say one other thing, because it's just fascinating. Some of the patterns of exercise, the way that exercise changes those red lollipops, is handed down. So if we're preconception, if we're going to have kids, we're going to hand down some of our good or bad habits in terms of exercise to our offspring. There's actually a whole bunch of ways that we can see these lollipops being inherited across generations, but exercise is one of them. Sleep is another one. If you're sleeping, good for you, those red lollipops. If you're not, you're damaging them. I mean, sleep is a big, big driver of biological age, of accelerated aging. If you're not sleeping, conversely, if you're sleeping well, if you're getting adequate, deep sleep and adequate REM, et cetera, and your time is decent in bed, that is a, anti-aging elixir, enough sleep. Stress, as I say in the book, is gasoline on the fire of aging. Stress might be one of the biggest variables on the aging journey. So back to your point of talking about how blue zones are different, those longevity pockets are different. I don't think that they're confronting stress in quite the same way that we are in cities.
Yeah.
Stress is gasoline on the fire of aging. The clock that we used, so again, the lollipops that we measured, a full 25% of those were influenced by glucocorticoids, were influenced by cortisol, driven by the stress response. I mean, no other variable influenced this clock as much. Yeah, I know, it's so extraordinary. And so I have to ask myself, is stress the bigger driver or the biggest driver? We see stress patterns heritable. We see PTSD experience, et cetera. We'll change those lollipops, will change gene expression. And again, we can pass those down through the generations. People who meditate, people who practice a little Tai Chi, people who do yoga, are biologically younger. The antidote to stress influences those red lollipops again towards a more youthful, a more healthful pattern. And you don't have to be a monk. You don't have to be in the monastery meditating 24 hours a day. They have shown, actually, with exercise, with meditation, yoga, etc., just a single episode, a single, can have favorable changes.
Wow.
But if you keep doing it, then you'll get those deep, rich, larger changes.
Fantastic. And so let's go a little bit of a deeper dive, because I'm always looking at how to empower clients and patients with regards to their own biohacking journey. And I define biohacking as that they have the ability and they are empowered to actually measure their own data. And then make adjustments. Cool. So let's look at measuring sleep and heart rate variability. How important is that with regards to empowering sort of the new generation coming through that are, I've been 23 years in practice. They're getting sicker earlier. They, more overweight earlier. There's more oxidative stress earlier. Older.
Yes. All of those phenomena will contribute to biological age. And we're seeing an older biological age in a younger population. Yeah. And all of the associated diseases of aging then increase as biological age increases, just like you're speaking to.
So do you recommend that people generally, if they can afford, like for bang for buck, get a sleep, tracking device or measure heart rate variability and get a trend? What is your recommendation?
Yeah, I've got mine on right here, my Oura ring. Yeah. So we didn't look at heart rate variability in our study, and the sleep was reported. So we wanted people to get 7 hours a night, and we gave them sleep hygiene tips. Our nutrition coaches gave them sleep hygiene tips as they needed them. But we didn't measure that. We didn't give them a tracking device. And I just want to say there's a lot of ways we could have changed our study, but it's such a pricey and involved endeavor. We had to make some decisions. So we didn't track it. However, in the book, and in my own life, yes, I love tracking it. And Oura ring, can you get Oura ring in
We can
South
through
Africa?
Made to Thrive. Yeah, they don't deliver here, but we sort of facilitate the process of bringing Oura or Whoop.
Oh, you can.
We can facilitate the process. Yeah.
Awesome. I love it. So it tracks my sleep, and it's actually intelligent data collection. So it learns off me, and I've been wearing this for years, and I can see that the accuracy just is increasing. So it talks to me, it tells me what my sleep is, what my, deep sleep, REM sleep, et cetera, my heart rate variability. I can definitely see my heart rate variability tank when my stress increases. There's no doubt about it. It tracks my exercise. There's a whole bunch of parameters that I just find very, very useful. So yes, if people can get that information and they're not anxious about it, it doesn't stress them out.
No, sure.
Do it.
But what importance, you see, the question is, and this is what I've always got, is people can do CGM, which I think is fundamentally, we can talk about it. They can get an Oura ring or a Whoop. How important is that? Because at the end of the day, it's a financial budgeting decision. I say to them, it's crucially important. The people that we've coached, we've worked with, that can measure their own data are the people that sustain their transformation in the long term. For example, my own clients saw that if they ate late, doesn't matter if they had the most nutrient dense meal filled with polyphenols, filled with catechins, it wrecked their sleep. So what did they do? They started eating earlier, or had a light dinner, or made sure that they fasted that night, and saw the changes in the data, and then eventually felt and experienced the changes of that lifestyle change. So how important will you sort of place that? Because I think it's crucially fundamental that we now guide patients and lead them and let them look at their data so that they can make the sustained changes.
I love it. I think that's awesome. I think it's great that you're doing that. I think that that's huge. Yes, I 100%. I love it. I was a big fan of, I was a continuous glucose monitor junkie, an addict for a long time. I was really addicted to my numbers, and we, I use levels to kind of filter my data, and I, correlate it with my Oura ring, which has been so helpful. I'm not using my CGM as much now. I haven't used it in a few months, although I feel like I should kind of jump in and do it periodically. But you're absolutely right. You'll get the evidence immediately in the form of your morning sugars, maybe an evening spike, or, if your eating timing is off, you can see how exercise influences it. I mean, there's just so much. You can see whether you've influenced deep sleep because you've exercised too late and then it's lower, or if you've exercised in the morning and then it's really robust. And you can find out the individual the patterns that you need for optimal living. So if people are motivated to do it, I'm 100%. I think it's fabulous that you're bringing those wearables in.
So I'm going to press you a little bit, because I think it's important. But how important? Someone's listening now and saying, I've got, let's call it I don't know how much it is back then, but let's call it 10,000 Rand. Maybe it's whatever, $700 to get it here. Compared to blood tests or seeing their doctor or going to the gym, how important is that? Because at the end of the day, people don't do what they value, they do what they most value. So on the list for Dr. Kara, where does the sleep measurement and the heart rate variability, does it sit in the top 3? Does it sit in the top 5?
God, that's a great question. I would say that sleep sits in the top 3. I would say, or the top 5 if we want to look in my study and conclude exercise, etc. So sleep does, without question. If you've got a finite amount of money, I would start with the provider who can set you on your course most wisely and smartly. So I would work with a good functional medicine provider for that limited income and do some baseline studies. After that,
this is a very good process now. So you're saying functional medicine doctor, basic limited study. Someone's listening now and they say they've heard the podcast. Now what can they do? Okay, they find a functional medicine doctor. We'll put links to SASIM. Okay, the second thing that they can then do, obviously there's going to be a journey there of lifestyle. The second thing they can do.
So the second thing that they can do, they're going to get on a protocol. So they're going. This doctor will order, a battery of testing.
Sure, good. But so then after that journey, because now they're going to be after that journey. What is the second thing they can do?
So
now?
once they've learned about them and what they need to do to thrive, this is when you can make the decision to engage in using wearables. Okay. And this would be where it would enter into the conversation for sure.
Now, where would CGM sit in? Does CGM sit of more importance than measuring your sleep, or less?
Good question. I would say probably for a lot of people, CGM may top a sleep wearable. Yeah, that's possible. I don't think that everybody needs a CGM, and I don't know that everybody is psychologically appropriate for CGM. I think anybody who's vulnerable to orthorexia or disordered eating, you want to step back from, additional tracking and additional obsession. I mean, there's a lot of people in the States who are pretty obsessed with keeping their numbers very, very low. And so we want to do it. We want to do it in a way where it guides us. It makes us smarter about what works for us. And we don't want to become too locked in.
Sure.
But we can turn sleep around considerably with some basic hacks. A CGM can be the difference between somebody really internalizing that they need to change how they eat and how they need to eat. So I think that a CGM is probably more impactful since you're forcing me to choose.
No, it's good. People need a framework. They need to know where to start, and they need a stepping process. And I think that's
so for the appropriate candidate, a CGM can be just a profound game changer.
And isn't
for the appropriate candidate, tracking sleep will be a profound game changer. I mean, honestly, I can't tell you how impactful it's been for me to figure out how I get the most deep sleep.
Okay, good. Let's talk about, you said exercise, and you can break that down into aerobic or anaerobic if you want to. But what's been more important that I've discovered over the last 6 months is just movement during the day being more important than exercise, having spent a lot of time in the villages of Cyprus and the Greek islands. I look at these people, they hardly ever do significant amount of like high intensity interval training. They push things, they lift heavy things, they walk a lot, they're very robust, they're chopping wood. Those those type of things.
Mhm.
But movement, number of steps is something that I really, really put importance on in tracking number of steps. I'm looking at probably about 12,000 steps is where I want to really get people. Obviously, if they're starting at
Good.
3,000, we grade them up. There's a grading process. But where would you put that importance in terms of tracking the number of steps in that sort of list?
I'm not a huge step tracker. I think it's tracking steps is fabulous. I tend to use time. If people want to track steps, that's great. I know that it's motivating for some folks.
Mm,
In our study, we just prescribed a minimum of 30 minutes
okay.
with a perceived exertion of 60 to 80% of max. So
Okay.
60% is pretty easygoing. Maybe you're light sweating, you're still able to talk. So you could take a walk with somebody and hit 60%. If you hit 80%, you're moving a little faster. You might be sweating a little bit more, but you're still able to talk. And that's your perceived exertion. So what you think is your 60%, what you think is your 80% of maximum is where you land. And we prescribed that to our participants at least 30 minutes, 5 days a week. So that was the minimum. And they could do whatever they wanted.
Now, Dr. Kara, why did you choose that compared to ensuring that they got 12,000 steps in? What was your rationale behind that? Are there studies showing that if someone gets 12,000 steps continue versus 5 sessions of aerobic exercise at 60% heart rate, the comparable data on the benefits on health?
We used perceived exertion because it's actually a really good tool in the research setting, and one's own perceived exertion actually tends to be a really accurate barometer of perceived exertion. Like they're not far off from when they measure exertion. So I think that it's using perceived exertion is a good tool. I didn't consider steps. I mean, for me, I'm a cyclist,
Yeah.
I mean, and cycling was is what I do as my main sport. I do resistance training as well now, but cycling I've done for my entire adult life. Am
I sort of just fabricating a sort of thought that persons that have an hour of exercise and then sit for the rest of the day without movement, they lose the benefit of that hour? That's where I'm sort of going to, because I've always been an exercise. I've run 11 Comrades marathons. It's a 56-mile race. I've done over 40,000 kilometers of running in the last 28 years. Fitness, I have never missed a training week in the last 23 years, never missed a working day in the last 23 years of work. So when it comes to exercise, but I think I've gone the opposite and sort of gone too far on that continuum, not looking at how many steps on the day. So what are your thoughts there?
Well, I want to say a couple of things. There is some evidence that over-exercising is a problem that might be a pro-aging thing. So, if you were a competitive athlete, I was a competitive athlete when I was in medical school. And at the end of a season, I would always get a sinus infection. I would always be really tired after I had, really worked, competed for the season. And they can measure that. If you look at IgA, one of the immunoglobulins that it keeps us healthy, keeps invaders like viruses and bacterial infections from getting in. Secretory IgA is always low in athletes after their season. Cortisol is usually imbalanced in athletes after season. So there's like this immunosuppressive effect. So over-exercising, I think, can be a problem that we need to be mindful of. But a lot of us can do a heck of a lot more exercise, and it's not over-exercising. Like I don't want to overstate that over-exercising, because the vast majority of us are profoundly under-exercising. And the study, and more studies are coming out on, exercise a lot. It's good for you. You will live a long time. To your point, I mean, I actually have a standing desk right behind me over there. That's my standing desk. Actually, it's a treadmill desk. So I can get my steps on. I can get my steps on that baby. To your point, sitting is toxic. And as you said, in Cyprus, they're not sitting like we are. We're not even designed to sit in chairs. So to your point, your kind of epiphany around how we need to be moving a lot is really important. And having, going back to wearables, having something sort of on your phone or whatever is going to flash up on your monitor and say, get off your butt. My Aura ring will tell me, you need to get up and walk around. And we're on the 4th floor here, and we're actually right in the middle of a state forest and on a river. And run down the stairs and go outside and kind of enjoy the sunshine and the woods
Yeah.
and the water, and kind of connect myself back a little bit. So yeah, to your
Brilliant.
point, I think where you're headed with
Brilliant.
your reasoning makes sense.
Okay,
But I'm
lastly,
curious, I'm actually curious about your protein intake and where you're landing with that.
yeah.
And
Yeah, well, my protein intake is at least 2 grams per kilogram, and I put 7 kgs of lean muscle mass on the last 2 years, but I've had to keep my IGF-1 much higher than traditional. I used to do a lot of fasting, and I looked at the benefits of fasting. I think it was really helpful to me in terms of just overall health and wellness on my labs and all the testing that I did, but I don't think it was good for my sort of body composition. So
how did you feel? How did you feel?
I felt incredible. I just 24, 36-hour fast with training, with exercising. I felt really, really good. But I've noticed increasing protein, increasing my lean muscle mass. I'm probably sitting, at about 9 to 10% body fat. It's made a huge difference in terms of the way I feel, and cut down the fasting. And maybe that's why I'm asking the IGF-1 mTOR sort of process.
Sure.
Because
well, you're sitting you're sitting right there. It would be interesting to get your biological age measured, really using DNA methylation, getting one of the good clocks. It would be really interesting. It would be fascinating to actually see it back when you were fasting.
Yeah.
And now that you're eating protein. And honestly, I think that's where the rubber is going to meet the road. That's where we're going to be able to see, who's right for the 2 grams per kilogram of protein, who's right for a more sort of plant-based kind of fasting structure, and we're going to see who's right. I mean, there is some preliminary data coming out of the lab that I've been working with here in the States that, is a DNA methylation epigenetic lab, showing vegan diets to actually slow the pace of aging. So we need to look at that with people who are doing a higher protein, healthy diet like yourself, and get both.
Yeah,
and
it's
then
tricky.
We need to look at it at different time frames. It is tricky. It's
because
tricky.
everybody's listening to David Sinclair. They're cutting down their protein. I'm trying to
eating
listen
one
to
meal
the
a
other
day,
side.
and
One meal a day.
I know.
They're over fasting. Then we've got thyroid issues, and that's starting to. So it's just we know the stories.
Even Longo will say that that fasting isn't the way to go. I mean, he'll talk about fasting mimicking, in a limited fasting structure, but he's not a fan of really intense or caloric restriction.
Yeah.
He's not a fan of caloric restriction. So
it's interesting.
Yeah. I'm just waiting. All these folks eating one meal a day. I'm waiting for them to show up at our practice because they're malnourished and they've been doing one meal a day for a year. Good luck at making sure you hit your nutrient targets when you're doing that. And I know David Sinclair, I think, talks about eating out a lot. And I think it's kind of funny. I think it's difficult. How are you going to get all your choline in? How are you going to get your folate in? How are you going to make sure you get magnesium in? And then, get some limited amount of protein from just one meal. I mean, I think it's hard enough doing, 2 meals a day or what most of us are doing. But
that's fascinating. Okay, we're wrapping up. Tell us what we haven't spoken about from your book in terms of like what's really important and people can just take away.
I would love for my book to be available to you guys. It's so much more. So you can reverse your bioage or slow it down using our program. If you're going to conceive, if you're preconception, we have the whole Younger You program for pregnancy and for pre-pregnancy for both men and women, how you dial in your epigenome. We talk about epigenetics through the lifespan, like why you want to care about it all of the time, not just in the aging journey. So the book, it's Younger You, and of course, it's focused on our groundbreaking research study where we reverse bioage in our participants. But there's so much more to the science of epigenetics, and I cover quite a bit of it in the book. I just really had a good time writing it, and I'm absolutely riveted by what we can do now by looking at gene expression, what we can say. And
we're going to get it, and I'm going to let the South African Society of Integrative Medicine know. So I think that'll be really important. My last question, because I'm so interested, and I'm going to say, everybody listening, go to Instagram and listen to Dr. Kara. She's wonderful. The way she just communicates things is wonderful. I love your
awesome.
Anyway, but tell us about your biohacks. What we're closing now. Are you doing infrared sauna? Are you doing cold plunge? Are you doing peptides? Are you injecting like BPC 157? What are you doing?
Yeah. I am playing around with some peptides for sure. I follow the Younger You program. I mean, I really try to hit my targets, but I have like yourself, have experimented increasing protein. So stay tuned for that. I'm about to publish a blog on this conversation.
Okay,
so if you sign up over at my website or follow me on Instagram, you'll see that.
Yeah.
I'm a big exerciser. I use cold plunges. I don't have a sauna, although I should have a sauna. I take a lot of mushrooms. I do a lot of polyphenols, all of those important epinutrients that tell my red lollipops where to go. It's true.
It's cool. So cool.
So I follow what I wrote about.
Brilliant. Well, Dr. Kara Fitzgerald, I declare favor and blessing over you that you would rise into your calling, that you would rise up as the most incredible health hero. I love your work. I love who you are. I love your courage. Keep writing, keep talking, keep just absolutely being you. I feel like I know you know when you listen to someone on their podcast and you feel like you know them, but I just thank you so much. And you just go from strength to strength. And I love another conversation, maybe in 6 months' time or 9 months' time.
Yeah.
So
we have another book coming out. We actually have another book coming out in November. So just keep your it's like a companion cookbook, but it's a focus on broths and healing tonics, better broths and healing tonics. So we can come back and chat about that. But thank you so much for having me. It was a thrill to be with you. Great questions.
Cool. Take care, Dr. Kara. We'll chat soon. We'll let you know when it goes live. We'll put all those links in the show notes to your book, and have a beautiful day.